So, hi everybody, I'm Josh Farley. I'm an ecological economist from the University of Vermont and president of the International Society for Ecological Economics. I'm really happy to welcome you to the International Society for Ecological Economics, the European Society for Ecological Economics, and the International Degrowth Network online conference, Building Alternative Livelihoods in Time of Crisis. So our goal with this conference is to disseminate knowledge dedicated to the public good. So what makes this conference special? So first, it's the first joint conference between ecological economics and degrowth. And we firmly believe that addressing our challenges will require coalitions as large and socially powerful as those who back our current suicidal system. Second, it's the first joint conference with ISEE and the European Society for Ecological Economics, which is one of 12 regional societies. And we're hoping this is setting a template for future joint conferences between ISEE and regional societies. This is the first entirely virtual conference for ecological economics using a template created by Degrowth last year in Vienna. So, really this has the lowest ecological impact of, a conference can have, and we really think that has to be the future. We need to develop ways where we walk our talk and have much less ecological impact with our work. So I'd like to stress, though, that a critical part of building alternative livelihoods and advancing a socially just sustainability transition in general is going to be generating and disseminating the knowledge required to do so. And the value of this knowledge is maximized when it's free to all. If I have knowledge to build a more sustainable and just world, sharing that knowledge is the best possible thing. Also, knowledge is collective and cumulative. It was created over the ideas and science and, the knowledge we use in ecological economics and degrowth was created over thousands of years by billions of people. And it should never be the property of a single corporation or person. But unfortunately, right now, universities are moving in the opposite direction. And at least in the US, they're increasingly seeking to get intellectual property rights. So first of all, this favors research dedicated to profits, not to the public good, when what we really need, the challenges we face, the ecological and social crises are there's no profit-driven solutions. And academics, and universities are trying to get intellectual property rights, then use the price mechanism to ration access to those who can afford it, which actually decreases its value. To give a concrete example, my university, the University of Vermont, currently spends about $500,000 per year trying to acquire and defend intellectual property rights, and then earns about $400,000 from those IPRs. So we're literally spending public money to deprive the public of knowledge generated with public funds, which is crazy. Another totally crazy thing is that universities pay professors salaries. If you're one of those professors lucky enough to get a secure tenure track position, the university pays their salaries to write articles and to review articles written by others. And then we give those articles free of charge to for-profit corporations who then put up a paywall denying people access. Their profit model is to charge money for the knowledge we are generating for the public good, and they make some of the highest profits of any corporation anywhere. So, this really is an untenable model. I would like to stress that this conference is really inverting the capitalist model. And it's a more efficient alternative. So the presenters, those who created knowledge for the public good, are shouldering the cost of making it freely available, along with the many volunteers who worked very hard to make this conference happen and are humble enough they don't even want me to list their names and give them credit. This developing and adopting alternative livelihoods demands that we also develop alternative ways of generating and disseminating the knowledge required to do so. And we see this conference as acting on its title. We're leveraging the crisis of COVID, to take a step towards, making knowledge and open access commodity, not a commodity, and providing it for all. So I welcome you to this conference. And with that, I turn over to my co-moderator for this session, Katja.
Many thanks, Josh, for introducing the conference. Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome. My name is Katya or Yekaterina Chertkovskaya, and I am part of the support group for international degrowth conferences. So I have the pleasure today to introduce the opening plenary, which is titled Building Alternative Livelihoods in Time of Crisis, as the title of the conference. And the very topic of this opening is alliances between academia and activism. So just a little bit of background. The topic of today's discussion stems from an international colloquium that preceded this conference and that took place in September 2020, where degrowth scholars and ecological economic scholars were brought together to discuss the connections and differences between these two areas. And one issue that came up was the role of activism in both. So, or kind of to what extent activism was present in both spaces. So ecological economics has been conceived as an academic area that creates alternative knowledge on economics, even if, of course, activism is to some extent present within it also. And as for degrowth, there is a degree of activism that is present within this area, and also degrowth itself has been referred to often as a movement, and degrowthers see social movements as key agents for socio-ecological transformation. So as a result of the discussion that happened then, it was decided to organize today's session around this kind of relation between activism and academia and the potential of alliances between the two. So there is definitely potential, but also the relation between the two is not clear cut. So for example, activists in the climate movement have been very much referring to work in climate science to bring the attention to the climate crisis, and also in a way popularizing science in a very powerful way beyond what can be done within the spaces of academia. Many scholars, on the other hand, devote their work to visibilizing activist struggles. But at the same time, for example, if one engages in activism within academia, they can be seen as too political, or sometimes activists can feel that their knowledge is taken from them into closed academic spaces, and perhaps people build academic careers by drawing on this knowledge. So for this session, the aim is to discuss the different potentialities and tensions, synergies and contradictions in order to ultimately address how fruitful alliances between academia and activism can be built. And to do this, we are joined by phenomenal speakers. So these are Tanya Briseno, Gabriela Cabana, Alexandra Covez, Clive Spesh, Judea Steinberger, and Tony Naushin. Before I pass the floor to the speakers, I can introduce briefly the structure of the session. So what we will do is we will start with a 5-minute statement from each of the speakers, introducing themselves and their connection to this kind of topic of academia and activist relationship. Then we will have long discussion. So as part of it, the speakers will have an exchange among themselves, and then later we will proceed to Q&A. So everyone attending, you're most welcome to write questions in the chat, and we will then pose them to the speakers. So yes, I think this is the introduction from me. And now, without further ado, I would like to pass the mic to Tanya Briseno. Tanya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And sorry, I'm still a little bit out of it. I'm in DC and we had fireworks all night long. So I haven't been sleeping and I'm just kind of getting settled here. But yeah, thanks for the invitation to this plenary. My name is Tania Briceño. I work at an NGO based in Washington, D.C., Conservation Strategy Fund. I am specialized in the evaluation of ecosystem services. So for about 15 years, I've been working on the implementation of ecosystem service valuation, working with policymakers, decision makers at local, state, national governments. I think we started with the question, are you an activist or an academic? I don't really like to define myself as an activist. I think as you've said it just now, sometimes there's a negative connotation to being called an activist these days. In my experience, I can only remember a couple of times when it's been in a negative connotation. So when I was writing my PhD thesis on the methodologies for ecosystem service valuation, I had a comment from my thesis supervisor who told me, Tania, your writing sounds, I don't want to insult you, but your writing sounds too academic. And I was like, why is that an insult to begin with? And then slowly kind of finding out that, at least, I mean, I went to a very conservative university, the University de Montréal, where there wasn't a program in ecological economics. So I was working with kind of neoclassical economists, but there's definitely no space for that voice, any voice of like activism in my academic experience. So I've really left and I work on implementation. Policy change on the ground is kind of my metric of success. And I think in the bottom of my heart, I am an activist. It's just that the connotation, another kind of bad connotation that is given is that by being an activist, you're someone that makes decisions out of emotions and out of thoughts and opinions, and not really out of facts and information. So I think that's kind of been my other part of experiences. The last time I was called an activist was kind of an assumption that I would be making decisions without the use of facts or evidence, in which case I have to move myself kind of to the more conservative approach. Yes, I am a scientist above all, and I'm not working with a blind agenda. On the other hand, I think there's enough information out there. You know, we don't need the same levels of precision on every part of the puzzle. I think the message is clear that sustainable economies need to be implemented and that we need to work together to achieve that. And I think there are maybe 3 areas that I found in terms of synergies and opportunities for collaboration, kind of thinking through what I think are, what my vision for implementing more incentives towards sustainable behavior, let's say, are. So having spent a lot of time kind of thinking about these goals and how we can measure and scale change, I think there needs to be more research into that science itself in terms of what are the things that make a difference when you produce a policy report or when you conduct an analysis. Which of these research types are being implemented and what are the conditions that are leading to implementation? So for example, engaging with policymakers and decision makers seems to be one of the main bottlenecks in terms of having some of this work and reports be implemented on the ground. And so how can we contribute to that pool of knowledge in terms of what are the factors, circumstances under which change happens and implementation happens? So maybe it's kind of the theory of implementation. Secondly, we should collaborate more in terms of filling up research gaps. In my experience in the evaluation of ecosystem services, I sometimes find places where there are mountains of knowledge, and I can see kind of science just producing reports now almost for their own sakes, but in the field of implementing ecosystem service valuations, there are areas where we see a lot of gaps for applying our work. For example, working with marine protected areas, there's almost no studies of like offshore marine ecosystems, so if we think of it at that level, or certain ecosystem service types, certain value types are understudied. And I think there's a lot of room for collaborating together and identifying research gaps where we can kind of help each other achieve this. And I'm kind of just last night, I was thinking, well, how can we achieve together? Maybe there can be more spaces for publishing collaboratively. So as some of the people on the policy and implementation part are making alliances, working with strategies for continents, for a certain type of approach, we're kind of in the know-how and what are the implementation strategies. We don't have the space and time to publish studies. None of the funds I ever get has a budget for publishing. So we're producing a lot of great work, collecting a lot of really great empirical data, but the project ends at when we continue the engagement and relationship with the policy implementator, but the academic circle, either we come together at that point or we kind of just part ways. So I think there's a lot of room about thinking how we can publish together. And at the same time, that would be generating knowledge that is useful for implementing these strategies and for answering the questions that some of these policy and decision makers are having in our experience as we have these conversations with them on the ground. And am I at 5 minutes already or? Okay, sorry.
Thanks a lot, Tanya. So now I would like to pass the mic to Gabriela Cabana. Gabriela, over to you.
Thank you, Katia, and thank you everyone who are listening to us now and everyone here in the panel. I'm an anthropologist. I'm speaking to you now from Chile, where I'm studying the different conflicts of energy transitions. I'm studying in particular the implementation of large-scale renewable energy projects in the south of the country. And I'm also a bit still waking up. It's very early in the morning here, and we had quite a crazy day yesterday. I'll tell you more about that later in my intervention. Well, so when I was thinking about how to relate to this idea of labels, like if I had to choose between being an activist and academic, I realized that I would have to go for the complicated answer and say that for me, both activism and academic work are tools for transformation. I'm an anthropologist, so my interest in anthropology comes from a desire to understand our shared human potentialities and the long histories of struggles for human freedom. Sadly, anthropology has been mostly locked up in academic silos and very often seen its revolutionary potential watered down to mere documentation. But it doesn't have to be like this. There is really no opposition between wanting to understand the world and wanting to transform it. They indeed enforce each other. For me, at least, activism has been the best school of research. It has taken all my transdisciplinary skills to understand our ongoing civilizational crisis in all its complexity. Because whenever you decide to organize with others to defend what you find precious, you must be ready to see all dimensions of a problem, to track its history, and to engage with its political side. At least from anthropology, there is really no way out of it. You must also engage with the emotions, the numbers, the dry policy, and the potentialities of direct action all at once. It really requires huge conceptual clarity to keep track of all these things. And here, academic skills can be extremely useful. Now, I don't think I need to convince you who are listening to us today to get implied in the reality you're studying. For me, it would seem completely unrealistic and unreasonable to ask you to remain detached from the incredibly challenging times we're facing. We grew up, and I think here maybe I'm speaking for my generation and older, maybe younger people have grown up differently. But at least I grew up thinking that staying in my increasingly restricted area of research was enough to make a positive change in the world. But today I'm certain, and I think we are certain, that this is not true. We have seen repeatedly that it is organized collective action what brings the changes we want and we need. And in that sense, I am glad I have found in the degrowth community a fertile ground for these kinds of approaches in which our research questions are constantly being questioned by the reality that we inhabit and we embody. Well, I cannot really end this reflection without referring to what is happening in Chile, where I am from and where I am right now. Yesterday, we inaugurated our Constituent Assembly that will write a new constitution. a popular demand that had been present across the country for decades, since the previous one was written under the dictatorship. When we started asking for it on the streets in October 2019, we were told it was impossible, that it wasn't realistic. Today, we have a Mapuche woman, Elisa Loncon, as president of this assembly that started working yesterday. It is transformative processes like these that are the ones that demand all our hearts and all our minds. We have seen in this short time, universities and research centers devote themselves to understand and support this process. We're seeing new alliances between social movements and innovative action-oriented forms of research. And this is the sort of collaboration we should foster, asking, how can I support the struggles for human emancipation? What questions remain unasked? What possibilities have been discarded as absurd or utopian, but actually deserve a second look? Or for the topic of this conference, how do we bring a new gaze to economics that can take us out of our current narrow and destructive ways of living and go into a more caring and gentle coexistence with life on Earth? As I said, I think we have taken too long to ask these questions with the seriousness they deserve. And I hope we're building ground to start asking them more and more and bring them to the wider public. Often when we speak about horizons like degrowth, we are told we're being naive or unrealistic. But the truly unrealistic thing is to continue doing it. And it's now precisely the moment to find our courage all together. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gabriela. Our next speaker is Alexandra Covez. Alexandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Katja. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a real honor to be here. I am an associate professor at the Corvinus University of Budapest, Hungary. I consider myself an ecological economist who is also part of the degrowth movement. I am an academic who has strong political messages, and I think it's important to realize that. The question here is always whether you want to also get involved with politics. And my answer to that is a definite no. But I have to be fully aware that the social and intellectual impact of my work can only be weighed if real changes occur in the political sphere. And this is where it gets tough. As an academic, I am true and devoted to ideas and narratives. And those are pretty pure. And if I don't want to get into politics, I need to find politicians who are ready to translate these thoughts into politics. And through that transformation, the purity will certainly be lost. If I am lucky, they pick up these ideas and not all meaning gets lost. The difficulty always lies with the fact that as academics, we provide them with these ideas, and when they churn them out, we may not recognize them. But this is, I think, something we have to accept to a certain extent. Politicians have a pretty simple logic. They say and do what makes them get into power or what makes them stay in power. And this is where I think we can come in as academics. I am part of a relatively popular online social theory magazine in Hungary called New Equality. We are all academics who try to present social scientific thoughts to the people in a language that they can understand. Within this magazine, I have a podcast series called Green Equality. And this week we have the 75th episode. Surprisingly, many listened to it, and it is becoming relatively popular. And when people listen, politicians also listen and start asking questions. They start looking for fresh ideas, and we have plenty to offer. We are in surprisingly constant dialogue with them and provide them with the theoretical backgrounds and policy recommendations. A few months ago, we had a pretty long discussion with young activists who said that we were just fog eaters. they said we should go and knock on doors and convince people and take the streets, and everything else is useless. Just talking and sharing knowledge is useless. And for quite a long time, I have wondered whether they were right and whether we really are just fog eaters. This is why when we launched the podcast with the European Society for Ecological Economics called Economics for Rebels, the first episode refers to this fog eating idea. But I feel not everyone can be an activist in this true sense of the word of taking to the streets and trying to convince people. So I still think that as academics, if we manage to have an impact and turn our thoughts into knowledge that everyone can share, we can still serve the cause. And this is obviously the way I try to serve the cause. And by this, I have the feeling that more and more people become aware that alternatives do exist. You really can think of new policies, and then they start demanding politicians to put these on their agenda, and it becomes a part of what gets them into power. So it is about thematizing public discourse and initiating social dialogue. Just publishing in Q1 journals will not do this kind of political impact. So I accept I might be fog eating, but I'm also focusing on impact. And this is what I might actually be good at, and I may just add a little bit to the critical mass that we so much crave when it comes to transformation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alexandra. So our next speaker should have been Tony Naushin, and unfortunately Tony is unwell, so she will not be able to join us today. So I would like to wish her the swiftest recovery, but I also thought that I would take the moment to announce this. So, and then now I would like to pass to Clive Spesh, our next speaker.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm going to give a short presentation here. Okay, as you can see, I'm a social ecological economist. So I just give you a, give me a second to get this operating. Okay, so we've already touched on a few of the issues that I want to raise here, and this machine might be a bit slow. There we go. Okay. So what I want to do is to go through a few things on the reflections around the academic and activism and the relationships between the two, which have been already touched on. For a start, there's a false dichotomy here. I actually reject some of these ideas that have already been put forward, that there is some kind of a division between academia and activism. What we see is this kind of idea that academia is abstract, it's theoretical, it's not of practical relevance, and it actually should be something that has no emotion and should be divorced from the kind of activist side of things. And activism at the same time is seen as something which is about political action or a vigorous action in a political cause, and that you're not supposed to do that if you're an academic. I think this is totally fallacious as a dichotomy. You cannot take action in the world, and you cannot be an activist in the world unless you understand the world. So what do we mean by that? I mean that theory is not an optional extra. Every activist has a mental model inside their head. They understand what is going on in the world, and if they don't, then their actions are ineffective and they fail. So the idea that we have to appeal to politicians, for example, which has just been said by Alexandra, is a particular theory of political action, and it's not one that I would actually accept. So we have to have ideas about how we understand the world around us, what commitments we make and why. Why are we activists? Why are we concerned about the environment? Who do we support and who do we oppose? When I look at things like Extinction Rebellion and the Fridays for the Future movements, I see failures. I see failures to understand. Who are they opposing? Why are they opposing? You know, what's Extinction Rebellion about? Opposing extinction? No, it's supposed to be opposing power structures and power relationships. So we have to understand these things. That means you have to have theory and practice that go hand in hand. You cannot be an activist without understanding the world. So who will transform society? This is a big question, right? So who are the activists? Is it the activists who are going to transform society? What we see in liberal society and in liberal approaches is that it's all pushed onto the individual, right? And then you get a response to this as well, actually, no, there's a big structure out there and individuals are powerless, so individuals can't do anything. So what do? Do you appeal to the power structure? Do you act as an individual? Do you do both? Well, you should probably do both, right? So the environmental movement has to address things like agency and structure. It has to understand the roles of agency. What is the agent? What can activists do? What is the structure? What is the structure we're opposing? And under this heading, what is democracy, right? And what do we understand by democracy? So we're looking at fundamental change. This is not about transitions. This is not about ecosystem services which appeal to neoliberal ideas. This is about basic fundamental change in power relationships. Who gets to control resources? Who sets the limits? Who enforces the limits, and what are they? If you maintain playing with the politicians who are already in power, you will not address the basic power relationships. So this is a fundamental issue. And this means that you have to have an understanding of structure and of power and power relationships. Degrowth, for example, degrowth is not inherently democratic at all. I've said this before in plenaries at degrowth conferences, and people were very unhappy about this. So 5 or 6 years ago. Well, now people are more realistic about it because they've seen the right of the right wing across Europe. And also you've had Trumpism, which is basically just fascism, right? So you can see this time and again, that degrowth actually can be used by the right. It can be used, it was used, you know, effectively by Hitler and the blood and earth and blood and soil kind of movement. So if we want democracy, it has to be institutionalized. Therefore, you have to understand the institutions and you have to work for them. What is the role of the state? So, you know, Hungary has a totalitarian dictator, right? Trump was a dictator. So you've got dictatorships that are operative in supposed democracies in Europe. How are we supposed to get to different levels of governance? It's not just about playing with the current politicians. There's also levels of governance. There's local, there's eco-villages, there's activism at the local level, there's community, there's things you can do in your household, there's things you can do as an individual, but you can also work together. What about multinational corporations? Like, these are the biggest power structures that we have, big institutions that need to be addressed. You have to understand them. You know, playing around with things like putting numbers on ecosystems and ecosystem services isn't going to help. What is the role of activism then? Theory, right? We need to have theory about what is activism, when is civil disobedience legitimate? There's political theory about this. How can change be achieved? You have to understand the causal relationships and causal mechanisms. So challenging power and vested interest is actually part of science. What does science do? Science exposes failures. So what we see in degrowth or in the ecological economics, the failure of materialism, exposing the failure of the modern economy, whether it's American neoliberalism or Chinese central planning. Science produces evidence. So we have evidence of the human impacts, environmental critique. You know, it's amazing to me that climate scientists are surprised that they're actually getting into political mess. Well, if you basically point out that fossil fuels are a fundamental problem for the entire economy, then you're criticizing a whole range of massive institutions, right? The most powerful corporations in the world, the oil industry, the car industry, the airplane industry, you know, all of these people are then challenged. So you're not neutral when you do science, you're immediately involved in politics. This is politics, this is criticism. And if you're doing your science properly, then you're going to be raising issues. You're going to be revealing the political and economic exploitation that goes on. And as a result of that, what do? What do you produce? A bunch of papers, write for journal articles, ask activists to write papers with you? No, you go out there and you do something about it. And that's what you should be doing. And the corporations know this, right? So what the corporations are doing is that they've already got their strategy worked out. This goes back to 1993, public relations firm identifying how the environmental movement is constructed and isolating the radicals. I haven't got time to go into the detail here, but you can see that they've already identified different elements of the environmental movement, and they have worked out how they can co-opt people, co-opting the pragmatists, and this is what's been going on. So look at this one then. This is actually from an analysis by corporations that are looking at NGOs fighting over a pipeline, right, with British Petroleum. So what you can see here is that they had actually worked out who they should engage with and who they should isolate. And the pragmatists are people who they can co-opt. So you can see that new environmental pragmatists, as I call it, in the conservation movement, are the ones that they've already taken on board, that they've been cultivated by corporate interests. Look at the boards of these organizations and you'll see the corporate executives that have linked in and taken over. You know, World Wildlife Fund, I mean, ecosystem services, brilliant for them. Offsetting, biodiversity offsetting, carbon offsetting, the neoliberal movement into the environmental movement. So, you know, when you look at the failing alternative agenda, I'm afraid the environmental movement is a failure. That's why you got Fridays for the Future. That's why you got Extinction Rebellion, because the environmental movement has failed. If it hadn't failed, we wouldn't be worried about climate change. We wouldn't be worried about biodiversity loss and all the other environmental problems that we have. They would have already been addressed, but they haven't been addressed, have they? We've got a bloody catastrophe going on. You know, so as a result of that, you've got a whole range of failures that are going. This is buying into the neoliberal structure. So what do we mean by structure? You know, 5 seconds, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's structure for you. Okay, so you've got to understand the structure. And what can we do then as activists and academics? Well, what activism can bring to academia is you can have reasons for pursuing knowledge. Why do we pursue knowledge? Meaningful engagement. So you're actually, as an academic, coming up with ideas about the structure of the world and what's wrong with it. And that means criticizing institutions. When climate scientists do their work, they end up criticizing the institutions that push fossil fuels and the fossil fuel economy. Or when degrowth activists are engaging, they're already engaging with a whole literature which is about the failures of materialism, for example. So meaningful engagement for academics. And there's an ethical aspect here in, you know, uniting your understanding of theory with your practice. So how do you live your life? What does it mean? You know, if you just discover that there are things wrong with the world and then publish some papers and do nothing about it, I would regard that as unethical, actually. So realization of an emancipatory science. So science is actually about changing the world. It's about making the place a better world. Empowerment and community. So academics get isolated, right? So academics don't have so much community. And if you're an activist, you can get community, and it can be very empowering for academics. What can academia bring to activism? Understanding of the structure and causal mechanisms, analyzing the role of agents, highlighting power relationships and bad institutions, highlighting the failure of pragmatism, identifying the potential for different institutions, and substantiating the potential for alternatives for socio-legal transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. So now I would like to pass over to Judea Steinberger. Judea, welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm Judea Steinberger at the University of Lausanne. Great to be here. I'm both a scientist and an activist, and I have zero problems saying that. I've moved on with my life. I'm going to share a few slides too. I really enjoyed Clive's talk and everybody else's points. So this is actually full, how do you say, full confession, something that I'd prepared for another talk. So I'm just going to skip over a bunch of things. I just want to show you some things here. So just to add to one of the things that that Clive said in terms of what can activism bring researchers, one of the things it can do is it's one of, I agree with all the aspects he raised, but one of the points is because our information is now a counterpower, now needs counterpower action, we need to create enough pressure for social coercion. And that pressure does not come from information-led change whatsoever. So the way that we bring enough pressure to bear on politicians and whoever is in power currently is partly through the vast megaphone of activism, if you want to say it very instrumentally. And they certainly read our research. What I've found through engagement with activists is that they read our research and care more about it than certainly lots of people who you would normally, in a reasonable word, would expect to do it. So I think I completely agree with Clive that we need to understand activism and the different types of activism in a sort of more academic way, in order to sort of, also because that's the way we see the world. So in order to understand what choices to make and what to do, and you can do this in different ways. So I've been trying to learn about this myself. It certainly doesn't come easy to me. I think we can think about different types of activism fitting in with the sort of leverage points of Donella Meadows, for instance, where you have your super low leverage point, which would be the normally accepted way for a scientist to sort of communicate with decision makers, all the way up into supporting and participating in direct action, nonviolent direct action, civil disobedience, civil resistance. And on the civil resistance scale of things, I found this book called This is an Uprising by Engler and Langler really helpful in terms of learning about activism from a perspective that's actually quite academic. So I think we can just learn, I'll just share some of my insights here. One of the insights is that the study of popular movements and activism is neglected in political science. And so some of the main contributions you have, or some of the main writings that we can learn from, come from practitioners themselves. And so that's one of the things that's reflected in this book, and I really appreciated that. They go over certain examples of specific movements, and they try to learn sort of general insights from these historic examples of success, or sometimes more lack of success. And I think that a lot of the elements that we learn from this study rejoin what was said in previous points. So one of the things is when you're talking about activism and popular movements and civil resistance, it often runs counter to established organizations that are already sort of more comfortable and complicit with established power structures. So, and there's a large role of training, there's a large role of how you run a decentralized movement and not make yourself vulnerable, but still keep the core going. You have to have a certain discipline of nonviolence. You focus on disruption. You have an idea around strategic uprising, which means that you're building a campaign around actions, and you have this importance of escalation and momentum. So one of the things you have to learn about is, from an academic perspective, when we run our research projects in a certain way, and we do our investigation, we write our papers, this is very different. You're always pivoting on things that are happening and trying to use missteps in your opposition in terms of escalating campaigns. You address the pillars of the establishment, so the structural analysis, you're trying to do that, you're trying to address it in strategic ways so that the whole can crumble. And that's one of the things that has happened in past popular movements that were successful, is they were able to address these different pillars. There's an art in balancing decentralized goals, decentralization and goals of the whole movement. You have an outsider role, but you also want to collaborate with allies within pillars because they're going to help the pillars crumble. And so all of these things are sort of this balancing art and it's a strategic art that's very different from what we're used to do. And you also want to shift the debate to your own terms, which, some often goes as the overtone window. And this is something where polarization plays a big role. So division and becoming unpopular is important as well. And I will just want to go onto some things around limits to appeal to power. So I think that one of the things is that past movements in terms of the student strikes and Extinction Rebellion have had a very much an appeal to power posture, where they were trying to get governments and politicians to act. And I think that we need to start thinking about doing things differently and moving to sort of the next stage, because that appeal to power has not really worked, and we can get into that in the discussion. I would also just like to say that academics also have a role in supporting activists. So we wrote this paper just a few weeks ago that was published, and it's just that we have to see our role in facilitating academic advocacy and activism in general in these emergencies. Also because there's more and more criminalization of climate and ecological protesters. And so one of the things we can do is we can support that and support them and resist that criminalization, point out that this is something where academics and researchers stand with them. So I think that that's something that I would like to discuss as well. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Julia. So, and thanks a lot, everyone, once again. So now everyone has had their introduction statement, and it is time for the exchange among the speakers. So the reflection has already started, and some of you have been integrating what have been said into your talks, which is wonderful. So, and now we have more space for this. So the way we planned is that everyone has about 2 minutes to reflect on what others have said. And there is no particular order, so just whoever would like to start first, please give me a sign, and you can start then. So who would this be?
I guess I can go.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have like a just kind of reflecting on what Spash was saying, that ecosystem service valuation has no role. I am, or that working with politics is not helpful, maybe big statements, but I still see, I think we're all working towards a common goal, which is creating sustainable economies. And I think basically to what Julia also alluded to, there are many phases that you have to work on, many pillars that hold it together. And so back to, I mean, I'm still very confident that the work that we're doing is having a change on the ground. And it is about how to have change on the grounds, because I've heard this kind of, you know, activism has been around forever. I'm not that old, but I've just seen kind of cycles of activism plays a role, politicians are mistrusted, gradual policy implementation is never enough, but don't still see the kind of details of how a coordinated strategy would work otherwise. So even though sometimes I feel that it's a very hard battle to fight, that hopefully every incremental change will get us there. And I mean, we have supported big restoration strategies by showing the benefits of ecosystem services. In Louisiana, we supported state agencies create a $2 billion sediment diversions that uses like ecological functions to rebuilding wetlands. And by being able to bring numbers to speak with local people, with fishermen in Louisiana that are very kind of very Republican, very anti-environment, but we can speak a common language that bridges different stakeholders together. And if we talk about what their harvests are going to be, what the jobs that are going to be created, what that's going to look like, and you plan accordingly, then you can get more people on board. I think one of the things that scares me the most today is that environment of divisiveness that we see here in the United States and in Europe and in Colombia, where I'm from. It just gets harder and harder to talk to people, and we're the half of us that believe something and are working towards an end, but the other half and some people in the middle that we just can't get on board. Is how do we find those venues, those languages, those metrics that can bring us together, because we need to be more of a critical mass than just a few of us with a belief of divisiveness. So I think definitely in the spirit of what was also said, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we need to work together. But I want to start seeing the details of what this is going to look like, and maybe what next steps come out of this conference to see what do I do next, you know, and that creating those networks and connections, I think it's important. Yeah, those are some loose thoughts.
Thanks, Tanya. So, Gabriela?
Yes, thank you. Really interesting to hear you all. I was just reflecting a bit on all these theories of change that Julian and Clive shared with us. And I just wanted to maybe share my recent experience, because I think it's very useful to highlight the relevance of alliances with wider movements for political self-determination and political struggle more widely. I think that's maybe a venue we haven't explored completely yet. When we started the revolts and the demonstrations on the streets, we were about to host the COP25 here in Santiago. And the different groups and NGOs from the environmental movement, we had all organized like a parallel COP for social movements. And when the COP got canceled, we did it all the same. We came together and we did a couple of marches, I remember. And attendance was extremely low. You know, like they were basically empty. We had a great lineup, and attendance was really low. And I was super frustrated because I could see that our political crisis was also an environmental crisis, and all the people attending there could also see it, but our message couldn't get to the wider public and to the wider political momentum that was being reached in that moment. But now, a year and a half later, now that we have chosen the people to actually write the new constitution, we have a significant number of environmental defenders and social ecological activists that have been involved for years in struggles to defend their territories. And they have brought this idea of an ecological constitution into the center stage. So, you know, it is possible when you ally yourself with people trying to transform the structures of power from their own histories, and maybe they're not going to use your concepts or your frameworks, but you can still find a way to collaborate and build proposals. And you know, we have seen it developing quite nicely in a year and a half, and we have created alliances of all sorts. So I just wanted to share that sometimes it won't be in the way that you think it's going to be. It's not going to be that people are going to join your struggle, but actually that you're going to put your tools and your perspective at the service of larger struggles, including indigenous struggles, but also other forms of struggles for self-determination. So yeah, just wanted to share those few things.
Many thanks for this, Gabriela. So who would like to go next? Clive?
Yeah, okay, so I just come back on a few points. So when I didn't say that we should not work with politics, that wouldn't make any sense. What I'm talking about is the structure of the political process, and that there is more to politics than politicians, and that the idea that you have to appeal to a certain set of already empowered individuals who have no interest in transformation at all. They want to maintain their own power and power relationships, which is why the corporations are so strong in the environmental movement, because that's exactly what they're doing. To appeal to them does not create change, does not create transformation. It just maintains the current system. So, you know, there's plenty of theory around this. If you look at, you know, Gramsci's theories of passive revolutionaries and the ideas of the co-optation of the environmental movement through neoliberalization and the way that this is operated, you can study this, you can look at it, you can see what's going on. And the point is that as I'm an economist, right? So I should understand the economy, which means that I can understand what happens when you set up a bunch of institutions that go around valuing the environment and put them in the marketplace. You maintain capitalism, you maintain the exploitation of the system. Of course, the Republican farmers will come on board because that's exactly the system they want to maintain. So if you're not interested in changing the system, you want to maintain capitalism, then goodbye environment. It's the end, right? So either you're going to change something that is substantive in the structure and make a substantive change, or you're not. Offsetting ecosystem services, valuing the environment in the marketplace, trading it. The Americans love it, right? Because they're capitalists, because the whole system is capitalism. And you're not even allowed to question capitalism. The United Kingdom has made it illegal to teach, to discuss actually criticizing capitalism, right? This is what's going on right now. Why would they do that? Because academics who are criticizing capitalism are a danger to them. They're not interested. Why would I want to cooperate with a government that doesn't want to discuss the problems of capitalism? Why would I want to cooperate with a fascist Republican Party in the United States that votes for Trump and wants to take over the democracy? I don't want to cooperate with these people. I'm sorry, it's just not on the agenda. It's irrelevant to me, and it's not going to create change. So I think, you know, then we look at what Julia was discussing. It's very interesting, right? So you have to have a theory of change, of power and power relationships, about what we want. How do we empower indigenous communities who have been wiped out by the capitalist structures? Look at the land grabbing that goes on in South America. Look at the way that governments have been overthrown in South America. Democratically elected government in Chile, you know, Pinochet, right? Pinochet taking over, okay? Supported by who? By the United States, by the Republicans, by the Democrats. You know, come on.
Thank you. Alexandra?
Yes, I was wondering while listening to you, what is our relationship to current mainstream political systems? Like, we have representative democracy in most countries, okay, we know we are facing serious problems with the representative democracy system, and of course a lot of ecological economists are doing research or even projects where we're trying to move towards deliberative democracies. But nonetheless, we somehow have to penetrate the power relations within the current structures and change that. So so when we're talking about cooptation, I'm wondering, you know, where does cooptation start? Like, if we're trying to to communicate or cooperate with political parties simply for the fact that they have the resources to change the system somehow. And of course, in the long run, we'd love to have a different democracy. But in the short term, we can only cooperate through the current system or change the structures. I mean, what Clive was saying, you know, it's important to change the structure. It's true, but to change the structure, you somehow have to penetrate the current structure. So where is our role in cooperating with the current structure without being co-opted by the current structure?
Thank you. Julia?
So I think that this is all very, very interesting, and I think it's something that Engler and Engler really help us understand in their book. Well, at least they help me. I mean, there's other things to think about, and I really also appreciated the other one I recommended, whose title I've already forgotten. I think something about the future we make, where basically they view power structures as social movements from above, and we're social movements from below. And I think one of the really important things here to understand as academics is that we can be brave and we can stand for something and we can speak clearly. And our doing that, because we have a certain social position and still a certain social status, encourages others within and outside these structures both to be braver and to take steps further as well. And I think that that's really important because we can protect people. Like I said, we can stand up for activists. So for instance, the same think tank that wanted the British government to criminalize teaching capitalism, called Policy Exchange, also came out for very punitive policing measures against Extinction Rebellion, which are now being discussed and voted in UK Parliament. And if we stand up, we offer some level of protection to secondary schools teachers, to activists. You know, we still can play that kind of role. And if we're brave, we also encourage our colleagues to be brave. So when I was speaking out publicly on certain stuff at Leeds, I was the first one, possibly. Afterwards, I wasn't the first one anymore because people saw me not getting my head chopped off, and then they made their way up to the barricades, you know? So just because it feels like a big step to take doesn't mean that you don't have protection, especially now. We've been, you know, Charlie Gardner and Claire Worldly wrote this fantastic article saying the scientists in Nature Communications, Nature Ecology, saying the scientists who know we're bringing the evidence that we are in this crisis and emergency have a moral duty to participate in the social movements and the civil disobedience that carries that message forward, that tries to change the system that's causing this. We have that moral duty. Now these publications exist. We have more and more and more. I can send them to anybody who wants. So all of a sudden you have sort of academic, you know, even published article backing saying it's not just okay for us to do this, it's really necessary. It's part of our job description, to be honest. At this point, I don't know what else is our job description because I don't know what else we're doing. And, you know, so I think that we have to be intelligent about it. We have to be strategic about it, but there's really a role for being brave and clear and loud because we bring others with us, because we still have this status going for us.
Many thanks, Julia and everyone, for your exchange. So very thought-provoking, and I can see that there are many reactions from people in the chat. So I think it is time to move to broader discussion and open the floor for questions. So I pass over to Josh here.
All right. So I've been actually trying to pay more attention to the questions and still remaining somewhat engaged with the conversation, which I thought was excellent. And there's quite a few really, really good questions. So I'm not putting them in any particular order, but I'll start with one that's kind of practical. And so one, I'm not even sure this is more than one or one person who asked. So would a strong theoretical background and academic grounding have made the Extinction Rebellion more successful? Is it something they needed? And related to that is, you know, what are the next steps for organizations like Extinction Rebellion to address the changes we need? So just, you know, looking at that tie between academics and activism, does the yeah, so you get the gist. Clive?
Yeah, and I have argued this in papers that it would have helped Extinction Rebellion. Extinction Rebellion's structure from the very start, I think, was problematic. They achieved great publicity. They've done a great thing in many ways for the environmental movement in raising the awareness of the catastrophe, but they failed, right? I mean, their failure, it was seeable from the very start because they're naive about political structure. They appeal to politicians, the idea that you're going to have some kind of citizens' assembly. And I tried to talk to some of the activists about what that meant. They have no clue, right? A lot of the stuff, how is it going to be structured? How are they going to deal with representation? How are they going to deal with lots of the problems that are well known in theory, right? That we know about this. Okay, what are they opposing? Who are they opposing? Why are they opposing them? How are they opposing them? What are the mechanisms? What are the causal mechanisms that they're trying to set up? What is this idea that early on, that a bunch of people getting arrested would make the UK government think again? Sorry, it didn't. Right, you know, they got very large prisons and they've got plenty of places to put people. And once you're on the arrest list and they've got a record on you, then you move to the next level and they start monitoring you. You know, this is modern society, modern police state that we live in. It's not social democracy; it's a police state that we're moving into. So I think that they could have done, you know, and I don't want to undermine. I think a lot of people are very strong. They have strong emotions and they did great things. And there are a lot of really good people involved in the Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for the Future. But I do feel that they ignored basically the understanding of politics. There were even talks put forward by people in XR leading it who said we shouldn't pay any attention to the left and we shouldn't pay any attention to the politics, right? I mean, they actually wanted to circumvent the whole of the left. What's all that about, right? That's a failure.
Julia? You had your hand right?
Yeah. So I consider myself to be part of Extinction Rebellion and part of the Scientist Rebellion. I have my criticisms and I agree with a lot of, you know, the beyond politics thing was definitely beyond me. I think that they should have adopted a fourth demand around social justice. I mean, various things I've written about that publicly. But I think it's also a movement that's learning. And I think that they also have more legitimacy because they tried the Citizens Assembly and they got them. And now that we have several Citizens Assemblies that went forward in the UK with very transformative demands that have obviously not been put into action, that also gives us more legitimacy for the next step, you know, and it's kind of, you know, it kind of has to do with this escalation, but we have to be fast about it because obviously we're running out of time and also movements live from rapidity. You don't stay the same and win. But I think that one of the things that needs to escalate is this idea that now we have this democratic demand, that these democratic demands around the citizens' assemblies that haven't been met. Now we have to challenge government. We have to challenge power structures. One of the things I think that's very positive with Extinction Rebellion is, well, first of all, they have the Scientist Rebellion, which to some extent they listen to some extent not particularly any reason they might want to listen to us on everything. But the other thing is that they've started creating this money rebellion. So that's one of the things that I think is quite interesting, is that all of a sudden there was some kind of realization that the root of the problem is actually around economics, and that's something that the movement has to take seriously and act upon. And I think that, so I think I would say it more as something in evolution. It won't be perfect, but it's certainly something that can be built upon.
And actually, one quick follow-up question on that, just as an American. So what I've seen is the most successful movement in the United States recently is like QAnon. There's these crazy ideas with zero support in science or anything else that have just kind of dominated our country. And I'm curious, you know, obviously that does not seem to have any academic backing, but I'm curious how, you know, in your views, is it more powerful to have the solid academic backing, or do we just, in the United States, we're watching this tidal wave of craziness? And, you know, which of these is going to be more powerful? Very quickly, maybe just does anybody have a response to that? All right.
I can say one thing, which is because I've been trying to understand this as well. I'm also American, and obviously it worries the heck out of me. But one of the things apparently that QAnon, that social scientists and political scientists looking into QAnon are learning stuff, right? And one of the things that they're learning is that one of the things that's very addictive about QAnon that really makes it hard for people to quit, you know, because it's basically like a cult. And, you know, like a cult, it thrives on the division of its members and everybody else. But one of the things that makes its members stay in is that they love the idea that they're onto a secret, that they're decoding the secrets of the world through these conspiracy theories. And of course, they're decoding the secrets of the world through conspiracy theories that are completely demonstrably nonsense. But what's interesting is that we as researchers are decoding the secrets of the world. That's one of the reasons we keep coming back to our jobs. We're learning stuff. We're not very good at sharing it, but we can share it as, listen, we have something to share that can help you decode why the world is going in the direction it's going, why movements in their past incarnations have not been successful. Like Clive said, they've been co-opted, you know, like other people have been explaining, there are all these different challenges, all these different forces at play. So we can explain the way the world is working, but we have to become a bit better at it, because one of the reasons QAnon is successful is because they're simple, you know, like the aliens landed at Pizza Hut or whatever is simple. It's a simple wrong statement. We need to make our statements also simpler in terms of having a view where people can sort of unlock the secrets of why the world is going in the wrong direction that they see all around them. I think we could probably do a better job.
So another line of thought in a lot of the questions. So, you know, one person says they can't think of a single revolution that has delivered what was promised. And, you know, presumably academically theorized alternative systems, they haven't worked out as implemented. You know, and we clearly need a revolution now. So what needs to be done differently? And very much along those same lines, you know, the challenge with transition starts with the current system that, you know, but tries to transform that system. So how do we get rid of these imperfect transitional policies? So, you know, if we wait for perfect conditions or for new policies untainted by the current system, that seems impossible. So how do we go through that messy transition period? And how do we make sure our revolution does not, you know, delivers what we're trying to deliver?
Gabriela?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can say I know how to make sure our revolution delivers what we needed to deliver. I just wanted to make sure I understood the question correctly. So what they're saying is that no revolution has delivered what it promised?
Yeah.
Okay, I would have to disagree with that. I mean, we have plenty of examples. They don't tell us about that, right? We are told a different story of how societies change. We are told that somehow one day our benevolent governors realize they're doing things wrongly. So, you know, I don't know, they decide to end slavery or something like that, or to become into a constitutional monarchy instead of a monarchy. But it's not like that. You know, you can really see history through the lens of transformations from different peoples struggling from their freedom, for their freedom. And I think this is not a different case in that sense. And I think here we need to understand that social movements and people involved in struggles are always building their own knowledge. They have their structures of knowledge. They have their theories of change. They don't write papers about it. That's our role. Sometimes we need to go and learn and understand their own worldviews and their own theories. But there is a lot of knowledge that is being built, that is passed down in practice, that is passed down in tradition. And that's like our treasure. That is what we need to really learn from and like create a space for that transformative knowledge to become mainstream and to like catch up like fire. I really see that we need not to restrict our vision of what knowledge is to what we do in our universities, which can be very valuable. And I think we're in a moment in which we have to be creative and find new ways of make collaborations and to have like interfaces. But definitely I wouldn't say, I mean, it's not a clear recipe, right? But I think that's the road we need to walk.
So I see.
Clive, I think, had his finger up for a minute.
Yeah, and Alexandra also. So Clive.
Okay, sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, I don't want to speak too much, but I just wanted to say, you know, I agree exactly what was said. If you study history, right, I mean, what kind of conception of revolutions do you have if you think that all revolutions have failed? It must be an extremely narrow one, because it's about change, right? Change in society. Society has changed tremendously, continuously, and the structure has changed. You know, is capitalism a revolution? Yes, it was a revolution. The English Civil War was a revolution about opposing capitalism. Capitalism succeeded. Did it deliver what it promised? Well, I don't know. We can debate that one. you know, but there's obviously change all the time. There's change with technology. Technology is always changing society. It's revolutionized the world, right? We're stuck here. I'm stuck in some little room talking to a conference where I used to actually see human beings. Now I just see electronic figures of human beings. This is a revolutionary change in communication. Has it delivered what we wanted? Well, again, you know, we can question this. What has it delivered? Is it better? Is it worse? These are questions, right? But there's revolutionary change going all the time. It's not necessarily what we want. That's the thing. And the technology is creating revolutionary change in our social relationships continuously. The economy is changing continuously, right? The neoliberalization, the financialization that is going on currently, empowering the banks and the bankers. This is a revolutionary change in the structure of capitalism that's going on. You know, so these things are happening all the time. You have to understand the process. This is a process. It's not a stasis. We have this little place here, revolution. We have this. Oh, revolution didn't deliver. That's such a static model. I mean, who asked this question? Maybe they're a neoclassical economist. I don't know. But you know, this idea of like static change between two places, it's a process, right? We're in process. Structure is difficult to change. And just very quickly on the thing with the QAnon type people, I think there's a serious issue there, which relates to this, which is about the social structure, right? What's wrong with America? America is disenfranchised people. Who are the QAnon people? Poor white trash, right? You do an analysis of the population who are supporting QAnon, extreme right wing, poor white trash, people disenfranchised, people with low education levels, people who are marginalized in society, who have no role in society, and who are put at the bottom and told that they're rubbish. That's why they're poor white trash, right? They're literally rubbish. So, you know, that you have to analyze the structure and look at why the people are actually marginalized in the first place. America fails people. So.
Thank you. Alexandra?
I was going to say something along these lines as well, that we're kind of expecting one revolution or one big change or one thing, but I don't think that this is how it's going to turn out. I think we're going to have a lot of different movements, a lot of different changes, and maybe a lot of small revolutions that will then change the whole system and change the institutions. And this is why I don't expect one big revolution to take place. And just a note on the QAnon debate. I think what we find here is a complete lack of social trust, and not just among these people, but among a vast majority of the population who no longer know who to trust, who to believe in, whether they should trust the politicians, whether they should trust the corporations, whether they should trust the academics. So I think this is one area where we really need to, as academics, we really need to start engaging to kind of reestablish some form of social trust, even towards movements or towards academics or towards larger systems as well.
Thank you. Maybe I would like to ask if Tanya would like to add anything on this question or the questions that were asked earlier.
Yeah, well, I kind of agree with what Alexandra was just saying. That's kind of my view. There's many actors, many people, many views. I think right now one of the biggest envelopes for change, because I'm like, where is it happening? Always in the search on where is kind of the biggest bang for your buck in terms of what can I do that will have the most impact on the ground. I think well, climate change is definitely an approach, or within the umbrella of climate change and climate change catastrophes. There's a lot of movement from many of these actors I am involved with. I also work in litigation, so a lot of the applications that we do is an evaluation of environmental damages. And we're seeing more and more litigation around climate change issues, and particularly against the fossil fuel industry, which is a very powerful one and is not afraid to put millions and millions of dollars against us to discredit kind of what we're doing. But it's coming to a point where the problems are so big and are impacting so many people of so many different views and employments that I think is gonna be one of the areas where, with a lot of focus and potential for impact and bringing people together, whether it is through regulation or with a combination of regulation, change within the corporations, and change within litigation and policy creation. I think that's maybe an area that I would focus on for having most impact. And also, as I said before, kind of having a way to understand where we're having impact. Is one of the studies I recently reviewed by World Resource Institute. Only about 25% of the policy reports or studies carried out were actually translating to something of a change on the ground. So that's a very small amount of papers and thinking and writing and work that is translating into action. Which is concerning, because then that means a lot of this research is just kind of being published, tucked away, or research for the sake of research. But we want to see and understand how this work is translating into what impacts on the ground. And ideally build a strategy that understands these metrics and works together to get there.
Thank you.
So there's quite a few, there's a lot of great questions. There's no way we're going to be able to get to them all. But a little bit of a follow-up on this that's bringing other questions. So I actually look at one of the most successful economic revolutions in terms of academic inspired and changing the world was neoliberalism, which was based on Milton Friedman's ideas and very powerful and very, very destructive. And I think that relates to one of the questions is Milton Friedman had the vested power interests liked his ideas, funded his ideas, helped them perpetuate. So one person asks, your comments all miss an important point, how to take control of sources of power. If academic views that, envision a world that only favors the few, they have the power. How do we address something like that? And this gets back to the other idea about revolutionary change. How do we make sure, there was a reiteration, let's not get hung up on what a revolution is, but we do need revolutionary change. And how do we really push it the right direction? So that's kind of combining a couple of different questions. But this question of, how do we take control of sources of power, and how do we deal with the resources flowing to those who have a message that resonates with those in power?
Alexandra?
Well, I would definitely argue that this was a revolution. I don't think that was a revolution as such. I think it's an idea, it's a narrative that a lot of people bought into. And once they bought into them, the institutions started building themselves on these kind of ideas and on these paradigms. And then obviously the institutions started to strengthen these ideas and these narratives. So I think neoliberalism is not, well, I can't really see it as a revolution, but this is exactly the path we can follow, I believe, that once you start changing the narrative, changing the ideas, then you can change the institutions, or when you change the institutions, the narratives will change themselves. So it's like a self-reinforcing loop, and I think this is the path that we can follow. And obviously, as academics, we can have an input on both sides, both the institutions as well as the narratives.
Gabriela?
Yes, well, I think this is a great question to illustrate how the revolution we're looking for. And here I go back to what Clive was saying about how degrowth could be undemocratic. This question serves to illustrate how it's not really about, not any way of getting into a policy implementation is valid. Neoliberalism in all its brutality was only implemented because it had the backup of a dictatorship here in Chile. And they spent a full decade and a half with the backup of a military government that was disappearing and killing people so they could implement their policies. And then they sold it to the world as a reasonable approach to economics. So I wouldn't want to have that done with degrowth, even if they were, you know, the more eco-friendly, nice kind of policy. If you're backing up your change through that sort of top-down power, then it's just definitely not my revolution. So here is where we really need to transform power itself. It's not just about capturing and getting into some key positions, but actually about transforming how we relate to each other more widely. And in that context, we can start thinking about degrowth maybe as a guide for how we want to live. But if it's not a collective decision, I would rather not have degrowth, in the same way in which we have neoliberalism just like, you know, hit into our face and destroyed our country for so many decades.
Julia?
Just very briefly, because thanks Gabriela and Alexandra, but just to maybe just as a counterpoint to Alexandra on changing the narrative can be powerful, but I think it's also something where our current theory of change has too much of an emphasis on that and trusts too much in that. And I just recommend that people have a look at an article by Evgeny Blustein that was just published in Political Geography that he calls "Transformation is not a metaphor," where he basically criticizes this approach of trying to just change the narrative without thinking about what real power and countering real power looks like. So I think that's one of that's quite an interesting addition to the discussion.
Thanks, Julia. Clive, you're next.
Thanks. Yeah, I also agree with what Julia just said. I think we have to be concerned really about the material structures as well, not just changing narratives and telling stories. I find this quite problematic. Of course, I believe in conceptualization and getting the conceptualizations correct, which is why I oppose things like natural capital or ecosystem services, because I think that they're actually they're fallacious and they aren't actually addressing what's the reality. So it's not that conceptualization and language aren't important, they are. And getting the concepts right to understand the reality, both the social and the biophysical reality, is very important. But at the same time, I agree with what Julia's saying, that, you know, if there are real power structures here, there are military tanks, there are guys with machine guns, you know, and these are the things that need to be addressed. Now, can we do that? Well, you can. You know, there are such things as the International Court of Human Rights. Okay, it does have successes. Okay, nothing is perfect, but there are many levels here of which we can operate on. I actually like Arulvatan's idea of institutions here. I think it's quite useful. We can go all the way through from the conventions that we have in daily practices through the norms of our behavior. Again, this has been touched on, right? So why don't people speak out? Like Julia was saying earlier, you know, I've been through censorship, and I've been, you know, in a place where 5,000 people said nothing while I was being censored. After I win my case, then they start supporting you. You know, great, it's a bit late by then, but at least it's nice and it makes a change, right? So why did people stay quiet? Why did Hitler get into power? Because no one said anything. You know, why did millions of people get gassed in the chambers? Why did nobody stop Stalin? These kind of things, right? This is the problem. But norms of behavior are very important to all this. Speaking out, saying the right things, speaking, you know, truth to power, as it's called, or whatever, but also just changing your daily practices, you know, doing the things that are right, talking about the indigenous people, talking about what's wrong with the corporations, pointing out that Trump is a fascist, right? He is a fascist. If you look at him academically, you can define him. It's not a derogatory term. It's an academic classification. Why is the media not shouting this from the rooftop? You are being ruled by a fascist dictator. Well, they aren't, right? America doesn't do it because America is not a free society and it doesn't have a free press. You know, these are the kind of things that we should be discussing. But then we get to the rules and regulations. And this is the point, right? People are fixed on this idea that it's all about rules and regulations. Well, in Arrold's classification, that's one part of institutions. The norms and the conventions and daily practices are just as, if not more important, in the institutions of our society. And those are things that we can influence and can be impacted on. They're changing the way that people live, moving to eco-villages, changing what you buy. These sorts of things can work. They can do things, but it's only little bits and pieces. But you can do lots of bits and pieces. It's not just about the revolution and changing the structure on the big scale. And this, again, this is back to process and some of the other things that have been said. Active action at all levels, multi-level governance. You know, there are many levels of governance, from the local through to the international, changing everything, active on all levels.
Thank you, Clive. So yeah, Josh.
Now we just have that last 1 minute.
Exactly.
Last 1 minute for people. But there was one interesting question that I'll read if we don't have time to have answers, but people might reflect on. And one person just says that suggestions about one way of participation is the correct way seem authoritarian and opposite the culture of the environmental movement. And that maybe we need to respect diversities of talents, motivations, and interests in participation in the environmental movement. So the idea, I just put that out there because we do see a lot of different views. And if people want to address that in their final minute, they can, but we do just have 1 minute left. So I'll turn it back to.
Perfect, thank you. So then let's go in the same order in which we started. So Tanya, I would like to start with you, your closing statement, 1 minute.
All right, well, thanks again. Nice to meet you all. I'm really happy to have this lively discussion. Again, I mean, my conclusions are that we need to understand better what is having impact, and that's a great space for academic contributions. I hope we also think together about research gaps and that we create more spaces for joint publishing of reports and policy briefs. We mostly work on policy briefs, abstracts, journal articles. So if we can kind of come together into collaboration in those spaces, I think that would be a great achievement of the group and the conference. So have a great rest of the conference.
Thanks a lot, Tanya. Gabriela, you're next.
Yes. Well, as an anthropologist studying economics and studying all these myths of economic rationality, sorry, I just really need to make a call for all of us to just question what economics in itself is. I think this is the moment. I mean, we did something terribly wrong a while ago, and we need to really rethink and rebuild this whole field of study of human experience in a way that really, really enables us to live in freer societies. So that's my goal, to think for that revolutionary change. And I'm also looking forward to seeing you in the rest of the conference.
Thanks a lot, Gabriela. Alexandra, you're next.
Yes, thank you all for this discussion. It was really interesting. And my closing remark would be that, we started like, I think even in the title, it was academics versus activists. And we tend to, as Clive said, we tend to think in dichotomies. But on the other hand, I think that we have absolutely no idea, no matter who we are, we have no idea where change is going to come from. So I think we just need to trust that whatever we do as academics or as activists, and no matter how hard we press, change will come from one place or another. But I don't think we can actually say that transformation is going to take place like this or that, and who's going to initiate that. And I think we just have to accept that. So nobody's right or wrong in this.
Many thanks, Alexandra. Now over to you, Clive.
Well, of course, I believe in that there is such a thing as right and wrong, and there are bad theories and good theories. So I'm afraid I would disagree with what you just said. Of course, it's complex, and there's transformation and its ongoing process, and there's uncertainty, right? Strong uncertainty about the future. But that does not mean that we do not understand structure, that we do not understand social structure, or we do not understand biophysical structure. We understand these things. That is why we have social ecological economics, and it combines them together so that we have a better understanding, and then we can actually help. What are the mechanisms that we need to address? What are the counter mechanisms? And I'd just like to finish on emphasizing the potentialities here. Of course, there's diversity. The last question that was coming up. The whole thing that is denied in our society is the potentiality, is the diversities of potential futures, different types of economies. Right? I've started moving away from talking about the economy because it's just capitalism, basically. And we should be thinking about economies. And that's something for the conference to really explore. What different types of social provisioning systems can we have? That's what economics should be about. It's not about choice. It's not neoliberalism. It's about social provisioning and being inclusive and creating an ethical and just society. And that's what we should be doing. And that's what I hope the conference will be doing.
Thank you, Clive. And now over to you, Julia.
I'm going to cheat and have two things to say. I think one is I'd like to reiterate that it's really important to be brave. And I'd like you, whoever's listening, to think of yourself in 5 years and 10 years and how bad things can get, like under Trump in the US, or like a lot worse in our societies and our environment. And you do not want to live with the regret of having not been brave enough. You do not want to live with the regret of having not done everything you possibly could to stop the train wreck that's happening in various dimensions all around us. So that's one of the things that I really think we need to be pulled forward by future hope, but also by future fear and by a sense of integrity. You need to act with that integrity. The second point I'd like to bring is, from a research perspective, you only know the system that you're up against when you bump up against it. It is only by trying to confront and change that system that you actually understand what it's made of, what power is made of, where the real structures are, where the real power lies. While you're just thinking about it, you have no clue. So you need to act and be part of that bumping up against the system to understand what it is made of and how to topple it.
Thank you, Julia, and many thanks everyone for your great interventions in this session, and I hope it will help to many of us to think through our own relation to academia and activism, and thanks also for all the thought-provoking questions that people have been posting.
And there were many great questions we couldn't get to. Our apologies, but limited time, but yeah, thanks to all of you very much.
Thank you and have a great conference. Bye-bye.